please remember to use your microphones so that your contribution is picked up. And we'll continue with the meeting. 1.1, there are no items of urgent business. 2.1, determination of exempt business. Can members agree to take the exempt appendices for 10.7 and 10.8 in private? Agreed. Grand, thank you. 3.1, declarations of interest and transparency statements. I'll start. I have a transparency statement in respect of item 9.3, the inspection report. There's mention in there of the Queen's Cross ELC inspection. I'm an elder of Fountain Hall Church, which owns the building in which the nursery operates. Having applied the 3-stage test, I've concluded that my connection does not amount to an interest. So that's just for transparency. Are there other declarations of interest and transparency statements? Councillor Blake.
Thank you, convener. Mine is a transparency statement, again, also a 9.3 inspection reporting. Both my children attended Broomhill Nursery at Cults, which is part of the reporting today.
Thank you. Councillor Grant.
Thank you. 2 transparency statements. The first in relation to item 10.2 and 10.8, as I'm a parent with children at primary and secondary school. And one in relation to 10.6. I have a child with additional support needs, but I won't be leaving today.
Okay. Thank you very much. Dr. Murray.
Yes, I have a child with additional support needs, but I don't think that will impact on any of the statements. So it's just transparency statement.
Vice Convener.
It's also on the same vein in relation to 10.6. I have a child with additional support needs.
Okay. Thank you very much. If that's all the interests and transparency statements. 4.1, there are no deputations. The minute of our previous meeting is there for approval. Is everybody content with it? Councillor Grant.
Thank you, convener, and apologies I wasn't at the last committee, but under item 1 it refers to the notification of urgent business, of which there were 2 items, and it doesn't state for each which the grounds within which it was deemed to be urgent. So I'm keen to just ask officers if in future we can make sure that in terms of the minute where there is a note of urgent business, that the grounds or the reasons are stipulated in accordance with due process.
Okay. Yes, Clerk will answer.
Thank you, convener. Yes, thank you, Councillor Grant. We'll make sure that's rectified in future minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anything else? Are we content with the minute for approval? Yes, that's great. Thank you. The business planner is next. Any questions on the business planner? Councillor Blake and then Grant.
Thank you, convener. My first question really is about line 22, which was the Northfield asset review, and line 25. Sorry, I'm going to have to go just check what line 25, which is quite similar. Northfield. And I basically, my first question is really, what is the difference between those 2 items, line 22 and line 25?
Okay, thank you. The director? No, Andrew, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, convener, and thank you for the question, Councillor Blake. I would say that there is really no difference in that. The intention is to bring one report which would cover both of those sets of instructions that are on the planner.
Yes, please. We have some feedback from the clerk on that.
Thank you, convener. Yes, that was spotted after the papers had gone out, so I have actually merged them now on the planner for the next item, the next meeting rather.
Thank you. And back to Councillor Blake. Was that it?
No, convener. But thank you. Thank you for that. I guess, so I've got 2 other questions about line 22/25. My first question again is obviously about consultation with the community. Obviously there's been an email, a note that's just gone out recently to the community council, but I'd be keen to understand around the asset review what other engagement there's been with parent councils, parents, more generally, the community, since it's about 2 years since there was the initial consultation.
That would be Mr. Jones.
Thank you, convener. The focus of the review to date certainly has been very much on the assets within Northfield, mainly the non-schools assets, because we had done the previous feasibility study around the primary schools. So the focus very much been on the council assets. So a lot of the engagement has been around the staff and services that which use those buildings and which deliver services from those buildings. And we're now moving into a sort of the next phase of the review over the next few weeks, where we are engaging with community members to get an understanding of the general feeling about the services that are delivered in Northfield, how the assets are used, and how those could be improved. So that's where we are with that review at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Blake.
So thank you for that answer. So will that involve any further engagement with the primary schools or the parent councils before it comes back in September? Or is it the fact that they were consulted 2 years ago sufficient?
That's it. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, convener. We're obviously coming up to the summer holidays, so engagement with school bodies, parent bodies will be difficult at this stage. The feeling is that we had the information, we were able to glean that information from the previous feasibility study. So we'll be using that information in the report that comes back in September.
Thank you for that, Mr. Jones. My final question on this particular point is at the parent council, at the Holy Family Parent Council recently, you said, convener, that none of the primary schools in Northfield will be closing, which was different from the instruction last September. Will we be expecting to see that come back as that could be confirmed as part of the review that when it comes back in September?
I don't think that's part of the business planner substance. The business planner is just a set of diary engagements for us to consider substantive issues. So I don't think that's really relevant for the business planner. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I do have some other questions. I do think that was an important point, but I will move on. My other question was in line 24. Obviously, we've got a couple of schools decanting. We've got Ferry Hill and St. Peter's. And I just wanted to be reassured that things are in place for both of those decants this summer.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, convener. Yes, the teams have been working very hard over the last few weeks to put arrangements in place, and everything is going to plan at the moment in terms of those decants happening over the summer.
Thank you. Councillor Grant. Yeah.
Apologies, I did have one other. Convener, my final question was line 34, minimising exclusion policy. Obviously, this is depending on an update coming from the Scottish Government. Do we feel the Scottish Government, is the mood music from the Scottish Government on track for this?
Okay. Ms. Shepherd.
Thanks, convener. Through you, obviously can't comment on any of mood music coming through. We'll obviously, as a service, respond when we have updated guidance.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Grant.
Thank you, convener. And I'll start by saying I think the planner's in good shape. So it's a compliment to you and the team, convener, on that. We like to see a nice, clean planner. The question follows up on Councillor Blake's points about Northfield and the report coming in September. I'm mindful that it's mid-September, so we work back from there. Papers probably need to be in some shape or form 3 or 4 weeks before then. So we don't have that much time. I'm just keen for a bit of reassurance, given the scale of the work, presumably most of which has been done, that we will have the report in September, first of all.
Can we have that reassurance, Director?
Through you, convener, absolutely.
Yeah, grand. Thank you very much. Councillor McCrae.
Thank you very much. Back to yourself again, Mr. Jones. Sorry to put you in the spotlight. As sort of local member for the Northfield area, there has been quite a few engagement sessions with local ward members regarding this this two papers that are now going to be merged into one. Just wondering if there are going to be any further engagement sessions before September with local members, just to go through that and just see if there's any points that we can feed back directly into that on a one-by-one session or by a local ward member led session into that.
Okay, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, convener. There are no sessions planned, but if members feel that would be helpful, beneficial, we can certainly look at that.
Okay.
I think there would be appetite for that, Mr. Jones, just to feedback the feeling that we're getting through the community and the community meetings that we engage in. Just with this instructions coming back in September as well, taking in consideration of the summer holidays, are we happy that that's going to be a timely basis for that to come back and feeding that in for potential school holiday time and parents and carers being away at that time?
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I feel that the timescales for reporting back are appropriate, and we should have everything we need.
Thank you very much. Councillor Grant.
Sorry, I didn't. I should have said I had a follow-up in relation to line 43, and it was just to have clear in my head. So the early intervention service test of change at Riverbank. I'm just looking for confirmation. My understanding of it's correct that it will be operational from August this year, and the expectation is that there will be a report back on progress 2 cycles from that. Is that correct?
Yeah. Director.
Correct.
Yeah. Grand. Okay. We also have at line 28 removal of school-age childcare policy item. The policy does not need any amendments this year and will be reviewed again next year. We're content with removing that. Yeah, grand. And otherwise content with the business planner? Yes, great. Okay, thank you very much. There are no notices of motion. There are no referrals. 9.1 is the performance management framework. Any questions on that item? 9.1. Councillor Blake.
Thank you, convener. I've got a couple of questions. Page 32, I was quite interested in the comment around the care inspectorate outcomes and the difference between council-owned and private providers. And I was just wondering if we could get a comment around this and how we work with partners to improve that. It was obviously a good picture across the board. I'm not suggesting that there's an issue as such, but it's more, so it's noticeable, you know, is there more that can be done?
Yeah, Ms. Milne.
Through you, convener, and thank you for the question, Councillor Blake. I suppose it's going back in time to when we did the expansion, and as a local authority, we obviously had more jobs at a higher rate, and our partner providers pay a lower salary. So we attracted quite a lot of staff into our settings. That continues, which can cause quite a high turnover of staff within our partner providers. Now, we are trying to mitigate against that by including them in all training that we offer and ensuring that we spend time working with them when they perhaps have an issue with staffing or with recruitment. We can see that they are improving alongside our local authority provisions as well, but they do have that added challenge around staffing.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. Councillor Blake. Yeah.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, and thank you for that, Ms. Milne. It's chart 1. This kind of answered my question from the last committee. So thank you very much to that about attendance pre and post COVID. And it's obviously an area that's still a concern, but it's good to see that we're actually getting pretty close now to our pre-COVID levels. I guess, as always, I think there's the question about what more we could be doing in this area. You know, are there other things that we could be doing that we're looking to pick out now?
Ms. Milne.
Through you, convener, and thanks for the question, Councillor Blake. I mean, I think in previous meetings I've explained that we've got a really sharp lens on attendance, that we work with schools to look to see where there's good practice, particularly around year groups, to see if there's interventions that can be shared from one school to another. We've got groups of schools who are coming together to ensure that they're working with one officer who's going out working with families, that more family approach, looking at generational attendance. So we do have many lenses depending on which school we're working with, but I can provide assurance that that there is a tight eye on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Blake.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And, you know, it's something I'm sure we'll just keep coming back to, and it's good to really see the improvement. My next thing I was going to ask about was, lost track of where I am. Somebody else wants to come in, I'll find where I
Okay,
am.
we'll come back to you. Next is Councillor Radley.
Thank you, convener. I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. I'm just looking at table 11 on page 36 around percentage of year-to-date staff expenditure. And the Q4 is 102%. I just wondered if there's some explanation around that. Obviously, it's not the unaudited accounts, but
Okay.
just looking for some narrative on that.
Thank you very much. Ms Milne.
Through you, convener, I think as the explanation goes into, sometimes there are needs come up during the year that haven't been identified at the start of the year when the budget has been put in place, and there might be a need to have additional staffing. That might be additional young people coming into the local authority, or it might be that someone has a specific need that needs to be supported.
Thank you.
Okay, and we've got the flex within the budget to allow us to provide what's necessary for the children.
Yeah, the director will help with that.
Through you, convener, within reason. So this year, I think over the year, we've seen about an extra additional 300 children come into our schools. That is definitely a slowing compared to what's happened in previous years. So members will be aware we've spoken quite a lot in terms of the increased demand coming into the system. So since the pandemic, we've had 3,149 additional children coming in. So there's absolutely a slowing of demand coming in. We're not yet seeing the decline that we might expect to see at some point. So hopefully that illustrates a wee bit.
Okay, thank you very much. Back
Absolutely.
to Councillor Radley.
Thank you. Moving on to page 38, it's around the percentage of care experienced children and young people with 3 or more placements in 12 months. While it's still below the target, we have seen an increase, and that is concerning. I guess what extra support is being put around families who are in providing placements or to ensure that they don't break down.
Thank you. Mr Simpson.
Thank you, convener, and thank you for the question, Councillor Radley. I think we do a lot to support placements, and this is all types of placements. So a placement could also be with mum and dad. So it actually comes in many different forms as well. But we also have to recognise that Scotland has a significant shortage of foster carers. So therefore, sometimes we're not always placing immediately at the point of emergency children in the most appropriate setting. It's a necessarily a setting, so they sometimes have to move beyond that when we can identify a more longer term or sustainable arrangement for their care and upbringing whilst we work with the family to make plan for the longer term arrangements for the children. So it is something we keep an eye on. It is something we report on annually, and it's important that we do that. I think that allows us to drill into the data. Are we talking about younger children? Are we talking about slightly older children who perhaps may be reliving early life trauma, and that manifests itself in more challenging behaviours? But I think it's also fair to say we are seeing children with a greater complexity of need coming into the care system. Whilst the numbers are dropping, the levels of complexity are not. And so I think we need to think about how we continue to adapt all that we offer foster carers, kinship carers, but also birth families as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Radley.
Thank you. That's reassuring, and I think we all have an understanding that transitions are very difficult, and I would be keen to see that stay at the low levels that we've seen previously. And finally, convener, you'll be pleased to hear, it's just around the work to maintain or increase the current number of foster carers. Our current number of foster care approved fostering families are quite low, and while we do campaigns throughout the year, I'm just wondering what more we can do to promote people to become foster families in the future.
Okay, thank you. Mr Simpson.
Thank you, Convener. Again, Councillor Radley, thank you for the question. Members may well be aware that over recent weeks, the Scottish Government have had a campaign to raise the profile of fostering, to encourage more into fostering. Local authorities are reporting that really hasn't had the impact that we would want for a range of reasons, which I can pick up off table if they would be helpful. But I think what we want to do is actually take some of the learning from that campaign and bring forward probably towards the autumn end of this year something about how we locally might want to do something around that as well, and certainly happy to keep members appraised of that as well.
Thank you, that's really helpful. I'd be really keen to see
Okay.
what that work looks like.
Thank you very much. And then back to Councillor Blake.
Thank you, Convener. My question was really about the insight data. So on page 50, I think it's really useful to see the difference between the on attainment. We're seeing between the lowest and the middle and the highest. It's obviously saying we are narrowing the gap with the virtual comparator, but it remains quite stubborn. And I think seeing the difference between the lowest and highest is quite good. And I was just wondering, if what more we can do around that to the attainment. And my other question, I'm just going to wrap this in at the same time because I think it's a bit simpler. It obviously talks about the initial positive destination, and we're just wondering whether there's also work going on about the sustaining the positive destination, the longitudinal approach to see that the positive destination is sustained.
Okay, thank you. Director.
To you, Convener. In terms of what more can be done, you'll know there's a report, the ABZ Campus report. I think that's part of it. Continuing to look at the breadth of courses available to young people in our secondary schools, but there's also that yearly review at secondary school level in terms of what the curriculum needs to look like for the particular cohort of learners who are within that school environment. So that work continues. I think we have evidence of improvement with ABZ coming through. So I think we just need to continue to build and develop, and I think we'll see that improvement continue to come through. I guess the other bit just to be mindful of is the work that Ms Milne and her team have done around the tracking, which has very much put a system in place that will allow really robust monitoring of where each young person is at any point in time that will really be operationalised next school session. Of more concern, I think, are the destinations, which are really, really stubborn. So I know that Ms Milne's working really closely with Skills Development Scotland to look at taking that forward, but that is not a measure that is totally within the gift of the local authority. It does need people to rally around. So I think that's where our focus really has to be.
Yeah, Councillor Blake.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. And I do agree. I guess what I was wondering, so for instance, Skills Development Scotland with the university and college sector has this, they have a requirement that they have to phone and survey young people within, so they do it 6 months and then they do it, I can't remember what the other timeline is. Is it the same? Do we have the same requirement when they leave school? Does Skills Development Scotland have that same requirement, or is that purely something they have to do with the college and the university sector?
Ms Milne.
Through you, Convener, and thanks for the question, Councillor Blake. There is a requirement to keep in touch. However, sometimes young people have changed their phone number. They maybe don't pick up the call, or they can become quite difficult to catch up with. But that requirement does exist.
That's all the questions. Can we agree? 9.1. Attendance 9.1. Grand. Thank you. 9.2 is quality improvement. Questions on 9.2. Councillor Radley.
Convener, it's just that I've got two questions. Paragraph 3.12 on page 56, around the sort of increased focus on professional learning in ELC. I'm just wanting to seek some reassurance this includes our funded providers.
Ms Milne.
Through you, Convener, yes, it does. They're offered the opportunity to join into.
Good, thank you.
One other
Councillor Radley,
3.13
yeah.
on page 57. There's a wee bit of inconsistency with the numbering, but that's totally fine. There's a note in that paragraph around increasing capacity of our middle leaders. Almost all DHCs have been involved in at least one quality improvement visit. Is there a plan, a schedule for the rest of them to provide? I understand that it provides our middle leaders a really good opportunity to learn, and I don't want to see some folk missing out on that.
Ms Milne.
Through you, convener, and thanks for the question, Councillor Radley. The reason that it says almost all is that we would try to offer it out to everyone, but it's not always possible in terms of staffing, and sometimes, you know, there might be an absence within the school. So I couldn't say that everyone had been, but we would be aiming for it, all middle leaders to have that opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we agree the recommendations for 9.2? Yep, all agreed, thank you. 9.3 inspection reporting. Any questions on this report? Councillor Grant and then Blake.
Thank you, convener. The first one is more of a comment, really. It was when reviewing, I don't know if it's more prominent in these reports than it has been in the past, but I found trying to follow the action plans quite difficult. I thought it was a bit jarring in terms of the format. They're a little bit kind of all over the place, so it would be useful if maybe it's just me and my particular brain, but I did struggle a little bit. But that would be helpful if that could be taken on board. But I was reading in relation to Forehill Primary School, the inspection report itself, and just looking for a little bit of clarity around some of the lines there and trying to compare it to the council report. So in relation to attainment in literacy and numeracy, it talks about that most children at P1 and P7 achieve the expected levels. The majority of children in P4 achieve the expected level in literacy and numeracy. But overall attainment in literacy and numeracy is weak. So I'm just trying to make sense of how clear that is from the council's perspective around where the specific areas of weaknesses are, because it doesn't, dare I criticise an inspection report, that doesn't come through particularly clearly to me.
Yeah, doesn't sound, yeah, it sounds contradictory.
Through you, convener, and thanks for the question, Councillor Grant. I think when we're looking at attainment, a part of that is planning for learning as well. And what was picked up through that inspection was that the school didn't have clear progressions in place, which allowed staff to have clear assessments and moderation. So the assessments that staff were making weren't consistent across the school. And that's what that is trying to explain in that comment. And you'll see that that's one of the actions within the action plan moving forward.
Okay with that, Councillor Grant? Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. And in relation to on the improvement plan, under attainment priority 3, it says the objective to that in attainment in reading will improve by at least 10% primary 4 and 7. Do we think we'll be able to achieve that within the timescales the improvement plan sets out? I mean, we should be absolutely ambitious, but just keen to make sure, if we are confident, how we're going to get there.
Okay, Ms Milne.
Through you, convener, and thanks for the question, Councillor Grant. Always ambitious. No, we are ambitious that we will be able to make that as part of our revamp of our progressions within literacy. We're looking at reading progression as a city, and Forehill will be targeted as part of that and provided with that support.
Thank you very much, Councillor Grant.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just lastly on Forehill, the council report, the headline report talks about maybe not too much of an onus, but certainly that it had been noted that there was a lot of quote whole class teaching and a need to better match learning to the needs of individuals. So I guess that kind of speaks to the work of GERFEC. So can I just get, from a point of pure ignorance really, can I just get an understanding of what ultimately that means if a class or a school is moving away slightly or somewhat from whole class learning, or too much emphasis on that, towards better matching learning to the needs of individuals.
Okay, Ms. Milne.
Through you, convener, and thanks for your question, Councillor Grant. That kind of goes back to my progression comment, and the fact that there need to be clear progressions, so we ensure that young people start where it's right for them, rather than teaching a lesson to the whole class with outcomes for everyone, considering a topic and perhaps differentiating the outcomes for individual children to ensure that they make the progress that they need to make. So that would mean looking at how classes are grouped, how young people are grouped within a class, making sure we're starting from where young people are at their learning and moving them on from there. Is that clear? Or,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. You okay with that? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Thank you very much. Sorry, I did just have one of them. It may just be the way it's presented in the report. So so it's in the first section of the headline report, there's a bullet that says the following areas for improvement were identified and discussed with the head teacher and a representative from the City Council. The first bullet point, which says, with support from the local authority, senior leaders need to improve approaches to evaluating the work of the school. It's that first bit, with the support of the local authority. So it kind of comes back, perhaps something that we've talked about offline in the past, around prior to getting to the point at which there is a report that states that there needs to be support from the local authority, what support is in place before then to avoid, these kind of reports coming back?
Okay, Ms. Shepherd.
Through you, convener, and a really helpful question, Councillor Grant, so thanks for that. So the quality improvement framework, which is also presented to committee today, that sets, if you like, the support that is available across all schools, and that's kept under yearly review to make sure that it is making a difference, and where adaptations are required, they are proposed to committee before taken forward. For me, what the inspectors are saying within that comment is the school will require support in terms of that evaluation. So there's something there in terms of building the capacity of the team to make those really robust, accurate judgments in terms of where they're at and where they need to go next. Hopefully that's helpful.
Okay, Grant, thanks. And I think, Councillor Grant, your comments about the varying formats has been noted. Great. Councillor Blake and then Radley.
Thank you, convener. And first of all, I would just like to say how excellent it is to see the progress at Heatheryburn. Ms. Presley's obviously here today, but it's been great to see that. And also it's good to see the progress that we've seen at Kingsford. I think I would say that congratulations to the teams that have done that. I'm also really pleased to see the report from Bucksburn Academy. And it's a shame that we won't be having the parent council tonight for obvious reasons, but there were two obvious areas for improvement that was identified for Bucksburn, and obviously because we won't be seeing it how that progresses, because the school got goods. I'll be keen to understand what we are thinking and what the school are thinking about doing around improving the quality of the passes and improving consistency in the quality of learning experiences, which were the two things that were picked out.
Okay, thank you. Bucksburn Action Plan Director.
Through you, convener, obviously we don't look for a formal action plan in response from the likes of Bucksburn, who got good across the board. Obviously the action points will be picked up within their school improvement plan, so I guess I would direct you to maybe have a look at that on their website when published.
Thank you very much. Grant. Councillor Radley.
Thank you, and it's on a similar point to Councillor Blake. Both Heatheryburn and Copper Pots Nursery have moved from Cat 3 to Cat 1, which is phenomenal progress. It's really great to see the improvement and the steady improvement through the sort of 2 or 3 different inspections. And I guess my question's around what lessons have been learned, how can we apply that to other both local authority settings and funded providers to make sure that we consistently see such great progress in our early years.
So, Director.
Through you, convener, and thank you for the tricky question. I think there are lessons to be learned, and I think probably Mrs. Presley would agree that actually when you have the leaders really owning the improvement agenda, that you actually see that progress. We did realise that some time ago and put in place some training for leaders across ELC, including head teachers. And that, I think, has really contributed to the positive gains that we're seeing across all of our settings, which is great. Also, to pick up on your point in terms of that steady improvement, I think that's really, really important. Generally, I would say I'm a little wary when you go from, night to day overnight, because that would usually suggest that maybe the initial evaluation wasn't accurate, or there's been a little bit of masking the reality at the re-inspection. So I would absolutely agree with you. When we can see that steady improvement coming through, I think that stands the setting in good stead for continued high performance going forward.
Okay. Thank you very much. Then Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Convener. I just wonder if the Executive Director and the Chief Officer would agree with me that a true and meaningful inspection report produced after an unannounced visit is far more valuable. I can remember that in my time in working in schools and staff room, the apprehension and tension in the weeks leading up to scheduled inspections were quite obvious. And it's quite obvious also in the paper, in the report, that the unannounced visits for schools like Broomhill and Cults, ELC, Kingsford, Cooter and Herriburn, Copper, Potts Nursery, all had excellent reports in an unannounced visit. And I just wonder if that kind of gives an indication that staff are maybe a little bit more, I don't know, frightened, if you like, about announced inspections and the lead time up to that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Ms. Shepherd.
Through you, Convener. In short, no, I don't think I would actually. So the methodologies between Cade Inspectorate and HMIE are very, very different. Cade Inspectorate tend to be unannounced, and HMIE, obviously you get a notification, but the approach to inspection is very, very different. If you have a school that has been on an improvement journey, I think the schools actually almost appreciate time to do some prep to make sure that they're ready to show their best light, to be honest with you. So I guess with both methodologies, there can be challenges, particularly, for example, if you have some real challenges around staffing on a particular day, and if you don't have the warning to potentially be seeking some support from colleagues across the local authority to make sure that you're in a position to present the best version of yourself at the time of inspection. But Miss Milne may have a different view.
Ms. Milne.
No, I agree with what Ms Shepherd said. I think it's important for schools to get that opportunity to prepare for an HMIE inspection. It is a different experience to a Cade Inspectorate inspection in that it tends to be longer and more intensive. Even a short HMIE inspection demands quite a lot of senior leadership time in order to be in focused meetings about each of the core QIs that are being inspected, whereas with Cade Inspectorate, the majority of the time is spent on the floor working in the playrooms rather than taking up the time of senior leaders within the school. Thanks.
Okay, interesting. Thank you very much. Councillor McGregor.
Thanks, Convener. It's about this good report from Bucksburn Academy. It's pleasing to see young people demonstrating a sense of pride in the place and the high quality relationships that we find, especially in the ASN wing. I thought that was worthy of comment, because it seems to me obviously that if young people are fed and rested and have good quality relationships, then they're going to learn much better. So congratulations there.
Okay, not a question, but thank you for the comment. Thank you very much. Councillor Cameron.
Yeah, I too were pleased to see categories being elevated, and I do recall the sweat and pain of an HMI approaching. Best of luck to you all. On page 119, it's about the pilot inspection. Maybe you can't, but just a short explanation. Can we have an indication of the difference between the pilot and what is our current standard?
Okay,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Milne.
Through you, convener, and thanks for your question, Councillor Cameron. The pilot is a joint inspection framework, so it's an inspection framework. Previously, HMIE and Care Inspectorate would both have inspected an ELC setting at the same time, but with very different lenses on it. So the joint inspection brings those together. They still have clear QIs that they're inspecting on, but they have a shared approach and a shared framework. And so schools are in a much, it's much easier for schools because they're working together. So meetings would be joint. Although they might be looking for slightly different things, they would be joint, and the schools would actually know what was expected. So it's much clearer in its approach with both bodies working together.
Thanks very much. That sounds really good. That, and saves time and is more efficient, and stress levels could be lower. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much for that. So we agreed with item 9.3. Yes, agreed. Yep, good. We can move on to 10.1. Questions on the education climate change report. Any questions there? Nope, no questions. Yeah, Councillor McRae.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the report. It's been really informative. Just going through with the pilot project at the moment and hopefully the good success that comes off of that, what's the scaling plan to implement that right across the city into all of our schools?
Mr. Reid.
Sorry, can I just ask for some clarification on what specifically you were posing the question regarding?
Yes, relation to the pilot programme that's currently taking place in relation to the climate initiatives being undertaken within various schools. With the success of that, or the hopeful success of that pilot, how do we then scale that up to right across the city to make sure that there's a climate action plan or initiatives in every single school and every single year group to make sure we're breadth of sort of interactivity with all pupils?
Mr. Reid.
Thank you. Through you, convener. I think in terms of kind of our approach, it really is sharing the best practice that we have available in our schools. I think this is a good first step in terms of kind of evidencing and showcasing some of the work that's happening. It's also starting to build up those kind of professional networks formally and informally across our schools, really to be able to kind of demonstrate and share both practice and develop that kind of professional learning opportunities. Continuing to work closely in partnership that we have kind of developed. Aberdeen for a Fairer World, for example, is a key partner. We have a range of partners and also are part of the kind of national networks. So in terms of kind of scaling it up, it really is just that kind of continued rigor and drive in terms of kind of promoting those messaging around kind of the responsibilities that we have in our schools, and that's linked to your kind of professional values, but also in terms of kind of the embedded practices that we have across our school pupil participation groups. So they're kind of key champions as well, and they're representative of a cross section from across the kind of school community and demographic, but it's embedding those learning opportunities kind of meaningfully across the kind of curriculum linked to experiences and outcomes, particularly within CFE and then through senior phase as well.
That's great. Thank you much.
Thank you very much. If there are no questions, we have two amendments which add to the recommendations for 10.1. Councillor Blake has returned just on time. I think there's an opportunity for us to combine both of these amendments. If that's acceptable to Councillor Blake, And we have a version. Is it okay if we circulate the potential merged amendment? Thank you. Just looking for a committee agreement with that updated version. It makes real sense. Councillor Blake?
I was just going to say we're content with the merge
grand.
motion.
So just a moment or two to read through that. Everybody happy with that solution, with the combined solution? Okay. That's Hilda Smith, isn't it? Is online. Yeah. And Mr. Rigney, yeah. Okay. I think we're all agreed. We're all agreed on that combined amendment. So that's fine. Thank you, committee. Let's move on to 10.2. Preschool meals annual update. Any questions on 10.2? Councillor Blake and then Councillor Grant.
Thank you, convener. I guess my first question has to really be about the Scottish Government and removing the Healthy Living Survey and what the implications. I appreciate you've been able to do this report, but more generally, what are the implications around that loss of data, which is obviously formed part of this, and considering healthy well-being will be on our report later, you think is quite important, so you could get that cross comparison.
Thank you. Ms. Shepherd.
Through you, convener, not sure I can fully describe the implications. I guess there potentially is a loss of some historical data trends. We are assured, however, by Mr. Campbell that we're able to report. But I guess in terms of if everyone's then reporting exactly the same thing, I guess that is all to be determined.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Blake.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm quite interested to see what we'll probably see over time regarding that. There's obviously quite a bit in the report about the app and the uptake, and I have to say, neither of my children use the app. They are not ordering their meals in advance, so they're obviously the minority here. But yes, so it was good to see the uptake in the app. I guess one of the questions we've talked about before to do with secondary schools has been the challenge around getting people to take their free meals, and I wasn't entirely clear that we are seeing that. Are we starting to see that uptake of people taking their free school meals because of the app?
Oh, the director going to answer.
Through you, convener. I think certainly what is being reported is that there is some promising indications in light of implementing the app, which is good. I guess I might suggest that actually looking at this report and also looking at the healthy weight report, that some of the things that influence young people in terms of taking their free school meal are the available of unhealthy options in the locality. And actually, it could be suggested that until we start restricting some of the access to fast foods within the immediate vicinity of a school, it may be more challenging in terms of getting the uptake for those who are entitled.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I have to say, I do agree with that. Even within the school, to be honest, I have one child who takes the healthy school meal and the other one who takes from the school if you check parent pay, eats pizza and bakery products and nothing healthy whatsoever. My other question really is about the school clothing grant and the free school meals and the work to bring those two together. I think this also came up through the Scottish Women's Budget Group as an important measure. And I just wonder, obviously that's probably been quite challenging, and I'd be keen to just get a bit more commentary around that.
Okay, thank you, Ms Shepherd.
Through you, convener, we are bringing things together wherever we can. I guess we do need to be aware of potential unintended consequences. I am aware from some of the work that we did to bring a range of entitlements, if you like, together, that in some cases we were making payment into accounts that then were not being accessed by the folk who really did need that money. So we're trying to be sensible, pragmatic, make sure that it actually does what it needs to do, and that work is ongoing as outlined in the report.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Grant.
Yeah, thank you very much, convener. The first question is in relation to just asking if we're in any different position around expanding free school meals to P6s and 7s beyond that which is in place at the moment, given that there was a commitment, and I think the Scottish Government had indicated that they would carry out that expansion when circumstances would allow.
So who could help with that question? Director, Mrs. Small.
Through you, convener, certainly plans are in train around that expansion around particular entitlements. I know some of the data sets are not quite there yet in terms of the joining up of Social Security Scotland data, but that work is ongoing.
Okay, thank you, but not in relation to expanding it universally across P6 and P7. There's been no other indication from the Scottish Government around that.
No, Director.
You, convener, correct.
Okay, thank you for that. And I've got a question in relation to the news, and it's included in the report around about the expansion into free school meals for S1 to S3 who are eligible. And obviously that is just very recent, but what does that mean in terms of numbers of pupils who will benefit from it across the secondaries within the city? Do we have that yet? And are there plans in place between now and August 25 to make sure that there is maximum uptake of that for those who are eligible?
Thank you, Ms Shepherd.
Through you, convener. Slight update from the report. So Scottish Government are keen to work with us, which is really positive. In terms of working through the detail of that is ongoing. More than happy to share the outcome of early discussions to members of the committee when it's known, but I'm not in a position to do so as yet.
Okay, Councillor Grant.
That would be helpful if it could be emailed around all committee members. I think that would be really useful.
Yeah.
And well, the next question is really what happens after that, when I suspect I know what the answer is, but presuming or assuming that the test of change will be in some way or a number of ways successful, I assume that our officials will be having dialogue with the Scottish Government in early course around how what happens after that.
Yeah, totally. Director.
Through you, convener, obviously in the absence of a crystal ball, very hard to know, but obviously we'll be looking to be finding something useful that could potentially be helpful to us in the longer term and also to other local authorities.
Okay, Councillor Grant.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. The director will, I'm sure, be absolutely on this already. I think what we don't want is to have a successful period within which there are beneficiaries between S1 and S3 who benefit from free school meals, and then the test change ends and there's a cliff edge. So it would be useful if at this point, as early as we can start to think about how we avoid that, assuming that we make sure that the Scottish Government picks that up or that the council has or give some consideration to
Yeah.
contingency planning in and
So
around that.
So, Director, we can do that. Can
More than happy to ask Mr. Campbell to take that into discussions.
be helpful, yeah. That would be great. Okay, thank you. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Convener. It's just a couple of questions. I don't know if the Director can answer them, and maybe Mr. Jones could. It's just about the works at St Martha Academy that were scheduled for August of this year. I just wondered if they're still on schedule. And the second question is, I wonder if you give an indication of the additional costs of the refurbishment of Bridget-on Academy that have led to the delay from 2025 to 2026. Thank you.
Over to Mr. Jones. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. In response to your first question about St Martha Academy, Councillor MacLeod, my understanding is things are still on track and we will have that delivered on time in the autumn. I'm not as sure about the second question in terms of Bridget-on. I wonder if you could give me some more information about what you're asking there.
Councillor MacLeod.
Yes, it just says in the report that the quotations received were indicated a higher than anticipated mechanical and electrical costs, and I just wonder what the cost of the projected changes were. Is it quite substantial, or is it insignificant, but it's certainly enough to delay it for a year? Thank you.
So, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. So that relates to work through the condition of suitability programme, I believe. So we have a set budget which is approved through this condition suitability programme. So where jobs come in where there is a need for additional budget, we do have to seek authority to be able to increase that budget. So that's where we're sitting at the moment. I'm afraid I don't have the figures in front of me in terms of how big that difference is.
Okay, thanks very much. If that's all the questions, we can turn to the recommendations. We have a proposed amendment from Councillor Blake, which I think is very reasonable and acceptable. Can the committee accept that amendment from Councillor Blake? Any problems with that? Yes. All agreed there. Thank you very much. We can go on to 10.3. Any questions on the whole system approach to help you wait? No questions? Shall we turn to the recommendations? There's an amendment from myself. Is committee content with the recommendations plus my amendment? Or hopefully? Yep, that's all agreed? Yeah, grand. Thank you very much. So 10.3 is agreed. That takes us on to 10.4, the behaviour action plan at 10.4. Questions on 10.4? Any questions on 10.4? Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, so I'm looking over there. I can see Mike Paul's name there. He's sadly not in his seat, but he taught me or tried to teach me. I'm not sure if I ever quite achieved it, but he always wrote the following words in my substandard essays: "So what?" So I was not particularly great at explaining things to its fullest potential. But I was left, having read the report, which kind of sets out a lot of steps that's been taken to better equip staff and make sure that those tools are in place. But I wasn't left knowing the so what. So what is it at this stage? And I appreciate that this is just one point, but what does it mean in terms of the particular issue and the extent to which we're making progress on it?
So who can help with that question? Ms. Milne.
Through you, Convener, and thank you for your question, Councillor Grant. I think the so what is that we have the conditions in place to support staff to ensure that they know how to report incidents and that they are reporting incidents consistently, which perhaps wasn't the case previously. What we need to do now is we need to look at how those reports are being made and ensuring that we're able to gather data from them to identify what the antecedent was, what was happening just prior to the incident, to help us to be better prepared in terms of interventions that we might discuss with schools. We've set up 2 committees who look at data and another committee who look at safeguarding and sharing best practice. And whilst we're interrogating that data, we're looking for patterns. We're trying to identify times of the year where we might need more support, or incidents that are occurring more regularly in perhaps one school or with one member of staff. We can drill right down to individual members of staff, identify whether they've undertaken the training. Do they need some additional training? Are the approaches they're taking not suitable for the young person that they're working with? Do we need to work alongside staff from other services in order to provide that support? So I suppose the so what is we've got the data and we are using that effectively to support schools as they move forward, going out and visiting, considering the environments that young people are in. And obviously that links to other reports today, but also considering how can we best use the space at that moment in time to support the needs of the young people that are within that school.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you for that answer. Section 3.30, so it refers to the safeguarding group comprised of trade unions and officers. I was keen just to get a little bit more feedback on the back of that answer and the work that's been done, the work that we're saying still needs to be done, what the view and continued position is, if there's continued buy-in from trade unions, if that is continuing to go well, if TUs have been raising concerns. Just, I'm keen to understand if from their perspective, they're confident that the so what in the first question I've just asked will be worked, advanced. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you. Ms Milne.
Through you, Convener, and thanks again, Councillor Grant. Yes, I think we have a really positive working relationship with trade unions. They will raise issues with us and we'll work together in order to find solutions and support. If it's in relation to a school where there's perhaps been a spike in incidents, we'll look at that together to analyse what the causes are and then provide that support. I think the meeting that we have fortnightly helps us to ensure that everyone's up to date with national guidance and how that's going to be implemented across the local authority, and how trade unions are working closely with us to support that when they're speaking with their members as well.
Okay, yeah, Councillor Grant.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for that. So recommendation 2.2, it sets out how officers see progress being reported through the National Improvement Framework. I'm assuming that that would be just as regularly as every committee cycle, that there will be some reference of some kind. Is there something beyond that that officers intend to report back in 12 months' time, or at a certain point, you know, at the completion of the phase 2 or phase 3, or is it just that we'll see that woven through the National Improvement Framework updates?
Okay, thank you, Director.
Yes, it would be through the NIF updates as you've had over this academic year. I think importantly, you've got that routine update. It's quite hard to put a time scale on for things coming back because obviously we await in some cases national guidance. It depends on the publication of that. What I would say is I'm not sensing any resistance in terms of providing a fuller report again. But it's just the actual time scale of that. But I'm sure that's something that Miss Milne and I could take away and maybe think about. Would it be helpful potentially at the end of next academic year to kind of tee up for the following year? I think that would be reasonable.
Okay, Councillor Grant.
Yes, I mean, naturally, the opportunity to have question and review updates at every committee cycle is the optimum. That makes sense. But if I think it is, and I'm not going to be overly prescriptive, if it makes sense over and above that, to have something that's a bit more specific and bespoke at some point in time.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Malik, next.
Thank you very much, Convener. It's my question in relation to data and reporting. How reliable and consistent is the incident reporting process across schools?
Thank you. Ms. Milne.
Through you, Convener, and thanks for your question, Councillor Malik. There are probably two parts to that. The actual system itself is fairly reliable because it's built into our IT systems within the council. What perhaps isn't so reliable and is picked up within the report is how incidents are reported. So that ability for us to analyse and to understand what's happened is difficult in terms of how the words that are used within the reporting. So to overcome that, we're going to create templates for staff that help them to understand what needs to be reported at that high level to allow us to give the best possible support.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Malik.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Millen. Are there any difference between reported incident and actual events based on feedback from pupils and staff and unions?
Ms. Milne.
Through you, Convener, I think if I'm hearing you correctly, I think maybe in the past there was a feeling that incidents weren't being reported. I think I'm much more confident that we've got all of the incidents being reported through the system now, which is part of the reason I think for some of the increases. But I'm confident that incidents are being reported and that staff know how to report incidents. Because we created the e-module, which was shared with all staff and is a mandatory training for all staff. So I'm confident that that's shared.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Malik.
Thanks very much for that clarification, Mrs. Millen. Yes, because I had so many times from unions and now we got clarity. My next question is, so how quantitative factors such as staff perception of behavior are student well-being being tracked alongside quantitative incident data?
Okay, Ms. Milne.
Through you, Convener, pupil wellbeing data is part of a report later on in the agenda today, and that is looked at alongside incidents in school. So as I explained earlier, we can look at individual schools and we can drill right down to individual staff and pupil level, and so we can see how we perhaps need to support in a pupil or a member of staff around incidents in school.
Thank you, Councillor Malik.
Thank you very much. What support has been giving to teachers and staff in managing behavior such as training or specialist support?
Ms. Milne.
Through you, Convener, and thanks for your question, Councillor Malik. In the first part of the report, there are lots of preventative measures that have been put in place. We had a professional learning festival in February of this year, which was well attended by staff and delivered, but each element of it was delivered by a member of staff who had some training within the ASN sector and was able to support the learning there. That was very positively received by everyone who attended, and confidence levels were seen to have increased in terms of staff's confidence in dealing with children with additional support needs or behavioural incidents within their class. That will be followed up again in August to make sure that practice, that the professional learning continues to have impact on their practice after 6 months, and that will help us to plan what we need to do for the future in order to build on the learning that's in place.
Thank you, Councillor Malik.
Thanks very much, Mrs. Millen, that staff feel more confident and supportive when dealing with these challenging behavior. Have staff absence rate due to stress or behavior related to incident changed since the action plan introduced?
Ms. Milne.
Through you, convener, I don't have that data to hand, Councillor Malik, and that's not something that I would be able to share perhaps here.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Next is Councillor McCrae.
Thank you very much, convener. One of the tables notes that there's 19% of repeated incidents. How are we targeting support? Is it through custom behavioural plans? Are we looking at additional interventions through sort of third sector involvement in there? Or are we just looking at multidisciplinary reviews to see if we can further support that potential pupil that's having that repeat attendances?
Thank you, Ms Milne.
Through you, convener, and thanks for answering your own question, really, Councillor McCrae there. I think it's a mixture of all that you've just mentioned there, but what is most suitable for that young person and for the school setting that they're working in. So we would take account of everything that you've mentioned there. It's really important to involve third sector if that's required, but to look at what interventions we have within our own system. So perhaps one of the outreach services going in and supporting for a period of time within the school.
If we're getting to a point where a pupil is so far dysregulated from the support that is trying to be put in place, how do we then further support that pupil or wider family to try and get that pupil to re-engage with our education services?
Ms Milne.
Through you, convener, and thanks again for the question. We have a couple of ways to do that. We have outreach staff that work independently, but who don't have a base within a particular building, but would be able to support pupils and families in terms of getting to the bottom of what's causing the issue, why aren't they able to attend, and then coordinating that support from third sector or from our own services.
Yep, Councillor McCrae.
Thank you. A final point sort of comes towards mobile phone policies. Obviously, we are still having a lot of phones being used in classrooms. Northfield, as a local member, I've been quite involved in looking at what's happening there through engagement sessions with crew. That seems to be quite successful, and obviously phones being put aside at the start of lesson and being handed back at the end. I do note that our head teachers have the discretion of what policy they wish to put in place, but how are we trying to ensure that, although I don't want to try and push head teachers down an avenue, but try and persuade head teachers to try and pick up these types of policies to help children and better learning environments within classrooms and put the phones away, essentially.
Okay, thank you. I think the director is going to come in there.
Through you, convener. Yeah, this one is quite a challenging one because the guidance that came out asks us very much to work individual head teachers with staff, with children, young people, and with parents. So all schools have gone through that process and almost landed on the agreed position. So I think we've got to be, it wouldn't really be for any head teacher to overrule what that did. However, I think it's important that that is kept under review. I know those arrangements probably haven't been in place for a full calendar year as yet. I would imagine, I'm looking at Miss Milne for a nod or a shake, that there would be that opportunity to look at the difference, the so what difference has that made, and therefore what does it need to look like moving forward.
Okay, yeah, Councillor McCrae.
We've seen trials taking place elsewhere in Scotland in terms of lock pouches. Are we looking down that avenue at the moment? Is that sort of been delved into to see if that's something that we can potentially put into our schools? I see if Ms Milne's going to be brought to the list.
Okay, Director, Ms Milne.
Sorry, through you, convener. Yes, Councillor McCrae, we've approached those other local authorities to try and understand better how those systems are working within schools. I'm currently in conversation with Edinburgh Council at the moment. There is a cost associated with it. It's how they've implemented it within their schools, and we need to make a consideration around that in terms of cost of the school day for our families too.
That's great. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Blake.
Thank you, convener. And actually, Councillor McCrae actually just asked one of the questions I was going to ask, which was about the 19%. the 19% of that were offered targeted support. And I'm assuming that 19% wasn't just of the ones that we've done a deep dive, that is a 19% across the board, that's what we would do.
Through you, convener, absolutely, Councillor Blake.
Yeah.
Can I ask, in 3.31, there is mention of a survey that's going to go out in conjunction with the HDRC, and if we understand what the timeline for that survey is.
Okay, Ms Milne.
Through you, convener, that survey wouldn't be until next academic session, and I would hope that that would be before Christmas, but obviously it takes time to work through that, and now I'm keen to have trade unions working alongside me on that too. Okay,
thank you. Councillor Blake.
Another question for me is on page 253. The Cabinet Secretary expects all incidents of bullying to be recorded in Action 4. But obviously one of the things, considering some of the information about the different local authorities, plus obviously the information we've gathered, there does seem to be quite a variety of how these things are recorded. Are we expecting there to be any guidance around consistency, or is that up for each local authority to decide themselves?
Ms Shepherd.
Through you, convener, I think we've got that guidance already, and I can confirm. I'm looking for confirm that our schools are operating in keeping with national guidance.
Thank you very much. Councillor Radley.
Thank you, convener. Councillor Blake has just taken my question, but I would make a comment that actually the range and variety and uptake of training available to staff is quite impressive. I wasn't fully aware of the quite detailed levels of training available, and I would welcome the work that's been taken on, especially around the sort of ELSA programs around regulating behaviour, emotional awareness, and sort of self-regulation as well. And I think that's really important moving forward. So would like to thank officers.
Thank you very much. Ms Munro.
Thank you, convener. I had two questions, I think. One was going back to page 241. You know, as a teacher, and interesting question prior to mine, you know, I have welcomed this training. I have found it useful. It is quite time consuming, and I'm just wondering, it says in 3.10, we'll be tracking the impact of any training delivered locally. Can I seek assurances that there will be a point, perhaps, if this training has a negligible effect on the figures? Is there some point when alternatives like increased staffing, increased PSAs will be looked at rather than just another course for me to do in the August?
Yeah, okay, thanks. That's an important part of the equation. Yeah, the director.
Thank you. Through you, convener, I think we'll be looking at the impact of this training, not particularly looking at other resources. So you'll see in the report that Ms Milne has said that there will be a follow-up 6 months from the point of undertaking the training, and that would be to see if the training is actually continues at that point to impact on practice.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I ask a second question?
Yeah.
The 3.26 violent incidents, can I just ask what comes under the umbrella of violence here? Does this include all dysregulated behaviour? For example, somebody telling you what they think of you using florid language and shouting it in your face, I would say is violent. So does this include all dysregulated behaviour of that type?
Thank you. The director.
Thank you. Through you, convener. So you'll be well aware there is no national definition of what violent behaviour is. Therefore, when this FOI request came in, our Health and Safety League determined what would be submitted. That wasn't something that Ms Milne and I did, quite deliberately to make sure there was an impartiality there. As can be seen, however, in the data, is that every local authority will have a slightly different understanding of what that means. So I think it's helpful that Miss Milne has shared the data with you, particularly across our comparator authorities, but I think it does illustrate that folk are looking at slightly different things. So obviously there isn't a national, continues to not be a national definition. We continue to very much be guided by the work of the Health and Safety Executive, and our Health and Safety Lead has taken decisions based on what to submit through this FOI request in keeping with that legislation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So approach this data with caution then.
I think it is helpful to a degree, but I think it is clear that different local authorities will have a slightly different grab of the data. And actually, without something that clearly stipulated, it may be, and I don't know, because as I say, Miss Milne and I weren't involved in collating the data for the FY request, but if a very, very general, if it came in and said violent incident, someone's then got to give their interpretation of what that means to share the data. If it comes in a more detailed way that asks for different bits of information, I guess you start to get a little bit more uniformity of interpretation, if that makes sense.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Convener. It's a nice, easy question. I'm glad to see the significant amount of professional learning offered to all staff in schools. Did this training involve all staff in schools, which PSAs, office staff, facilities, etc.? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Milne.
Through you, Convener, in terms of PSAs, yes, the training was offered to all PSAs. In terms of reporting incidents, we would expect that other staff would have access to that as well. The training in the training courses, though, would be attended by all PSAs. And in addition, we have also developed an induction programme for PSAs to ensure that they spend some time with the Educational Psychology Service, learning about pupil and brain development to support them when they take up role in school.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that part answers my question, but that was the PSAs, but there are other staff within the school who are coming into contact with pupils, and I mentioned office staff and facility staff and so on, who quite often have incidents happening within corridors in the school that the teachers are not aware of. So I just wonder if they should also be included in this sort of training. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Milne.
Through you, Convener, I'm open to offering that to facilities staff. I suppose they have their own range of professional learning which they'll engage with. And I'm sure in some schools, I can't say for certain, but I'm sure in some schools they will have been involved in the training, particularly around the de-escalation training. Thanks.
Right. Thank you very much. Mr Murray.
Thank you, Convener. Can I go back to Ms Shepherd's response to Ms Monroe's question? I want to assure myself that I understand what's happening. I think you said that there is no no national definition of what constitutes a violent incident. Is there an agreed Aberdeen definition, so that all staff who are involved in this and who would be making reports have a common understanding of what comprises a violent incident?
Okay, thank you. Director.
No, there wouldn't be. So we would be very clear in terms of what a dysregulated child, what that might look like. We would be clear in terms of externalizing behaviours. We would understand all of that. But violence in children isn't a term that we would generally use because we've looked at the root causes, if you like, of those incidents.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask another question then? Miss Monroe is a practicing teacher, and she doesn't have, I don't want to put words in her mouth, and no doubt she'll correct me if I'm wrong, but she doesn't have a clear and agreed definition of what comprises a violent incident. Is that not very unfortunate and really something that ought to be worked on if we're to get consistency across the schools?
Director.
Through you, convener. There's recently been a document published which actually looks at consequences for the most part. There might be something helpful in there in terms of sharing with staff at the start of the year. I'm thinking it's published. Has it been? Yes, it has been published. Happy to take that on board. Obviously, the language that we would use would have to reflect the national guidance, but happy to look at that as an action.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Can I ask another question? Is that okay? I'd be interested to know how many schools have not submitted any reports of violent incidents in the last year or so. And if that could be compared to previous years, we would have a good indication as to whether or not the training that has been put in place is having the desired effect.
Any feedback, Ms. Milne?
Through you, convener, it might be quite difficult to do that because in terms of the ability to identify individual children within schools, if there's small numbers of incidents in terms of naming schools, I wouldn't be able to do that.
So can I come back?
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that you name schools, far less am I suggesting you identify individual children, but I'd be interested to know how many schools have not used the system, and if the number of schools not using the system has declined over the last 12 months or so since the training has been put in place, that would be a very positive indicator that the training has been successful.
Okay, Ms. Milne?
Through you, convener, apologies for that, Mr. Murray. Yeah, that's not a problem. I can do that. Yep, I'm happy to do that as a service update.
Okay. Okay with that. Thank you very much, Mr. Murray.
Okay. Can I have one other question?
Yes.
I was looking at tables 326 and 327, and the impression I gained from that is that our primary schools have a much, much higher incidence of violent behaviour than our secondary schools. In fact, I think if my arithmetic is correct, violent behaviour occurs 21.5 times more often in primary schools than in secondary schools. I'm astonished, I would have to say. I wonder if we get some kind of explanation as to why that might be the case. And remembering, of course, that the information we have here is about reported incidents, not necessarily about the number of incidents that are taking place. But, you know, I worked in secondary schools for 39 years. My wife was a primary school teacher for well over 20 years. We can't understand that. We can't understand why the difference should be so dramatic between primary schools and secondary schools.
Thank you. Ms. Milne?
Through you, convener, thanks for the question, Mr. Murray. I think I'm probably going to pass to Ms. Powell, who will give us an explanation around dysregulated behaviour and how that presents itself in terms of school.
Okay, Ms. Powell?
Thank you, through you, convener. Hi, Dr. Murray, and thank you for the question, Mr. Murray, sorry. I guess one of the things we see in younger children is the sort of range of ways they'll show us that they are dysregulated is quite different from a secondary age pupil for the most part. Obviously, there's individual differences within both of those. We're also, I guess, dealing with a range of communication styles in primary school in terms of delayed communication, and therefore children who aren't able to express with words their emotions and their feelings and are showing with their behaviours instead. And given that the sort of
incidents include a range of kind of behaviours. It can be anything from, scratching up to much more significant injuries. You're going to see a much bigger range of that in primary settings as children explore their world in a developmentally delayed way. I guess we are seeing that. I mean, there are previous reports to committee around the sort of increasing complexity of additional support needs across schools, and that kind of increase coming up through would also kind of explain some of that in relation to the range and profile of learners we're seeing across primary schools, and I guess some of the behaviours that we might not have seen previously in primary schools in terms of as children try to make sense of their environment. We've talked before about factors at play for children and learners in our schools in regards to trauma experiences, in terms of communication difficulties, in terms of neurodivergent presentations, and all of those go into the way they are presenting in school and the behaviours, and as they kind of explore their environment, try and communicate with staff, but also respond to the learning environment they're in, and the kind of processes that might be put in place, how other pupils are, all those things mean we see a much bigger range of behaviours in primary school than we would typically see in a secondary school setting. Obviously, secondary school is a wee bit different in terms of the sort of brain development stage. In terms of the teenage brain, as I'm sure you're well versed in the unique challenges of that stage of brain development, but it does mean that they're showing behaviour in different ways, and so there might be children who are choosing just to leave the classroom, for example, but that might not hit that sort of violent incident threshold, whereas in primary school staff could be more hands-on, and therefore as a pupil tries to remove themselves from the adult, they're maybe knocking adults over, or adults are getting hurt in that sense, whereas so there's so many kind of variations at play, I would say, in terms of the presentation of primary age pupils and learners and secondary learners in terms of their development and stage. I mean, you know me, I could talk for quite a long time about this, but hopefully that helps a little bit.
Thank you very much. Dr. Murray.
Thank you. I get reading the report, I don't feel it's focused around the child. It feels more focused around training available to teachers, which is good, and perhaps it reflects the sort of source of the pressure to have all this, which was from the trade unions. But it doesn't come at me from considering what the final outcome is going to be. I mean, the training sounds good, but it's the final impact on the children. And that perhaps is reflected in the outcome, the only outcome we're really looking at, which is violent incidents. When we're considering that 82% of the incidents involve children with additional support needs, a violent incident is a failure of the support. And that failure doesn't just occur in violent incidents, it recurs in other ways. And it's to what extent, I know a lot of work is being done and a lot of listening is happening, but I'm just not seeing in the report over what's happening before we get to the stage of violent incident. Where are we with actually picking up how the children are managing in school before we get to that point, and so we can intervene before we get that far down the line.
Yeah, thank you. The director will help there.
I'll try, Dr. Murray. That was a very, very big question. So as you know, around 40% of our pupil population have an identified additional support need. So that's 40% of 26,500 children and young people across all of our schools. So obviously, stage one in terms of getting it right is the appropriate curriculum. And that would be, generally, if you have an appropriate curriculum in place, children will learn well. For some, obviously, that doesn't go as well as you might like. And at that point, you'd be looking at school level, how you may utilise resources, how you may put in place an IEP in terms of best supporting a child. You'd obviously be engaging with the family at that point. You may then have to broaden that out to from a multi-agency perspective. You may well get into the land of child's planning if it required that level of intervention, and so it goes. The challenge is the scale. So 40% of 26,500, that's a lot of children, and all children will be very, very different in terms of their presenting needs. I think there can be, and you know very well this is not the case, but there can be a bit of a simplistic perception that if you look at one diagnosis, if you like, that all children and young people with that single diagnosis will behave in the same way, and absolutely not the case. So it's a challenge. I think it's one that we will never get to the point where we think that we have 100% delivered on that because of the very individual needs of children and young people. But I guess how we are working for 40% of the population has to come through all other reports considered by this committee, because that's a huge proportion of our school population. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I think it's a very complex and very difficult thing. It was just we talk about not being simplistic, and I feel violent outcomes is quite a simplistic measure, and it's what comes before that and what can be done to ensure that these training is working and that it's impacting before we get to the reflection in violent incidents.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Noted.
Sorry, I had just one more question, and maybe a simpler one for you. Page 264, action 15. The action is identify supports for schools where children are not what?
Oh yeah. Ms. Milne. No.
Apologies, I haven't typed in the whole action there. I'd have to go back to the document. I'll do that and recirculate. Apologies.
Thank you.
Okay. That's all the questions. We come to Councillor Allard.
Sorry, thank you very much, Convener. I had raised my questions, my hand several times. Thanks very much for the officers for the comprehensive report. I think it's important, as we just heard, it's what we do before that. You know, it's all about prevention. But it's good to see the progress we have done against the National Behaviour Action Plan. I was talking on page 260, one of the action, which is action number 11, I think. Action 11, children and young people's view are embedded in the development of schools, policies and procedures. And I seek some reassurances about Convener, because we do the same thing with communities, we do the same thing with young people. When we seek people's view on embedded in the development of school policies, on policies and procedures, we always seek, maybe not from the people we should seek that advice. So how can we be sure that we include all the young people, and particularly the one, and we talk about prevention, who are more likely to be the one that our policies and procedures will not fit for them. So I didn't see that there, how we can have that prevention and how much we're interacting with the people we should interact with.
Thank you, Director.
Through you, Convener, and thanks for the question. Another tricky one to answer, but I'll do my best. I would absolutely agree with you in terms of those different stakeholder groups, in terms of the development of policies at school level. Children and young people are in some ways more important even than parents and carers in terms of that engagement. And there's a really clear expectation that there's a mechanism at school level to do that. An example of that playing through would be the work we did on the mobile phones, for example. It's really, really hard for us to overly stipulate what that looks like, because it does depend on your population. It depends on communication methods. It depends on level of English as a second language, for example. It depends on some of the groups that may have been identified as being vulnerable according to whatever policy you're trying to look at move forward. So, for example, if you were looking at an attendance procedure in your own school and you were aware that there were a particular group where their attendance is poorer, you absolutely would expect that the school were engaging with that group. So there's an expectation that school leaders know their schools well and actively engage with those harder to reach groups, if you like, determined by the policy itself. Those processes are quality assured by the central team. HMIE would also be looking at kind of a level of quality assurance around that. Again, what I think is helpful on one of the later reports, we added a question around the voice that children feel that they've got. Now, that's the first time that we've asked for that. It comes through in Miss Powell's Health and Wellbeing report later on. I think for this committee, that's going to be a really, really important one to track.
Okay, Councillor Allah.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And yes, exercising the voice, that some people will have a stronger voice than others, and it's not always the people we want to hear. And unfortunately, the one we want to hear don't always participate. So how to make them participate? My second question and lastly would be, is how we do that focusing on reinforcing positive behavior, not only in the classroom, but within the building, outside of the building, and also in public transport. Are we going to think about some thematic engagement and trying really to see our young people having behaviors lessons or approach about our young people, not only within schools but also outside school, because of course one goes with the other.
Director.
Through you, convener, I'm so delighted I'm getting all the easy questions today. I think it's a real challenge, isn't it? Because quite often young people will react according to the prevailing narrative about them. And actually, if there's a prevailing narrative that, oh, things weren't quite this way when I was young, etc., youngsters will show you that. I think we can all have an element of that, can't we? So I think there's a real need to be articulating and pushing out all the things that our magnificent young people do. For example, the event that Councillor Cameron attended, the unveiling up at Northfield Academy, where you had these wonderful young people who had the initiative and shown that real respect for folk who have served their country. So I think there's a real onus on us to make sure that we are resetting that narrative. I think there's some positive news in one of the later reports around the improving health and well-being in our young people across the city. So, but I do take your point. We need to maybe be a wee bit more proactive in terms of pushing these good news stories out.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to add, so many questions. There is a reason for this. I think we all recognize the progress that has been done. Thank you. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you very much. We come to the determination. Before that, I'd like to propose a 5-minute comfort break, and we so come back at 12:15 to determine this item. Thank you very much. Everyone, we have yep, thanks. If we want to reconvene, we've got an amendment from Councillor Blake for 10.4. I'll be moving the recommendation. So I'll be moving the recommendation, seconded by the Vice Convener. Councillor Blake, do you have a seconder? Councillor Grant. So I kick off, don't I? So I'm happy to move the recommendations. I think that through the report and through the discussion that we've had today, it's very clear that there is an enormous amount of very focused activity that's being given to the subject of behaviour, and every school community should be a peaceful, caring and respectful environment. And I think that the work that we've done as a committee collectively in creating, designing co-producing the behaviour action plan has done a lot to not just to demonstrate that we're committed to safer environments and better, more respectful behaviour, but also we take this theme very, very seriously, but also we're following up with practical action. I think that we've been giving a very clear and a very strong steer to officers that we want this area of work prioritised. So for that reason, it's really encouraging, I think, to read of the many actions and the follow-ups. So there's a considerable amount of training and support that's being provided to teachers and staff. I think that the Supporting Learners event in February is a very good example of bringing the professionals together, talking about and learning about how we can support each other. So I think that through that kind of collaboration, through the introduction of training, particularly the circle-oriented training, which is all about inclusion and respecting each other's rights. I think that that's clearly making a difference. I think the CALM team is helping with dealing with ASN issues, and as we heard, there is a very large proportion of young people in our schools who have ASN needs, who have special support needs, and that includes the growing number of young people who have neurodivergency issues. There can be other challenges, personal home challenges, which can contribute to emotional issues and which can be concerning, not just for the young person, but that can be spread beyond into the environment. So I think it's very positive that we're looking at causes of dysregulated behaviour. I think that is essential. Working together, providing the training available to 100% of staff and teachers. There's MABO training. Training in de-escalation restorative practice that's being offered in order to ensure that we are providing a nurturing environment for young people. And I think that was such a key point that we heard earlier on in the questioning, that we have to be child-centred. Everything that we're doing is all about the child, and young people are going through increasing kinds of challenges. So I think that by working together through the behaviour action plan, we've been able to support the various individuals, the groups involved, the teachers, the staff, the families, and particularly the young people with all of this very significant work that we've been doing, trying to become more aware of young people's needs and how we can respond to support them, particularly when there is dysregulated behaviour. I think that the training, the information around emotional issues, around trauma experienced young people, that is all vital for us to make sure that we continue to be child-centred, but also supporting, caring and helping all the professionals who are involved. So for that reason, I'm very pleased to support and propose the recommendations. And I think I'll leave it at that. Over to the Vice Convener.
Thank you, Convener. I am actually disappointed that we're seeing this sort of wording coming through to committee in the amendment. I don't believe it's constructive at all, because if we look at this objectively and what the guidance referred to provides, the key messages in that are ensuring school cultures are rooted in shared values to promote positive, safe and inclusive environments. It underpins the UNCRC, which is putting children's rights at the centre. It underpins early intervention and prevention and GIRFEC policy, getting it right for every child. Ensuring interventions are child-centred to a young person's unique needs and circumstances. engagement with children, young people, staff, parents and carers, identifying underlying needs to put in appropriate support to promote long-term change, and ensuring the promotion of multi-agency work. These are all themes that should be welcomed in this committee. And if we apply that to what we have been doing locally, we're absolutely heading in the right direction. And I want to make the point here that as a committee and as a council with ownership over education delivery, we need to look at the facts, and the facts are we have that policy outline and guidance with clear aims, clear values and clear direction of where we want our schools to be heading. And it's then up to us to apply that directly on delivery, and we are doing that. And I think it's important to reiterate that something as complex as human behaviour, and I know this was covered earlier, is very complex. It isn't a one policy fix, and it's unreasonable to expect that. And anyone who knows anything about human development understands the complexities of underlying behaviour and how that manifests in children and young people especially, and their developing brains. So we must keep this in mind when discussing behaviour in schools. And if we look at what's being done, the report clearly outlines the extensive work being undertaken. And as they say, the whole system is greater than the sum of its parts, and that the relationships between those parts create unique behaviours and outcomes. And I want to reiterate that, because of what, on top of what's outlined in the report, we should also be considering in committee everything else we are doing through education and children's services, and in relation to the themes of the guidance. And to name a few, we're investing in our school environments through the school estate plan. We are prioritising those ASN spaces with needs in mind, particularly in our new schools. Staff training, we've seen that extensively in this report and the positive feedback on that. And that came through from staff feedback. They were wanting that. Well-being, so work to improve well-being. We've seen in the well-being report and targeting certain groups where that data coming through are struggling. We saw that in a cohort of secondary school girls, and we took action around that, and we've seen that coming through in improvements. The play programmes with priority to certain groups who may be more vulnerable, that is a positive early intervention and prevention approach with strong community collaboration and empowerment. Our pilot programmes in 2 of our secondary schools, and working with our care experienced young people. The push up looking at whole families and that whole family system in our whole family approach and our policy that's come through around that, and everything that comes with that in terms of how we work with families and the supports that we put in place. ABZ Campus also feeds into that, and that's about individual children and their learning needs, but also that wider family needs as well, and supporting families on that wider basis. Work to ensure more targeted ASN approach. For example, the Pilot Bridge project we saw coming through previous committee, we're going to see that in September, and there's going to be learning from that. And there's going to be children supported with increasing resilience, etc., etc. The work that's gone into individual schools as well. For example, the turnaround in Northfield. We have first-hand evidence with Northfield that the approach works. There's a real cultural change that's been applied there, driven by a head teacher that has those values and is applying them directly with the school, with the young people. And then we have the NIF, the oversight we get on that data-driven push on top of that. And all of this feeds in and it's relevant. And we heard from officers earlier how vital that data-driven evidence is to further target support and build on that. And with that in mind, I would urge committee to reject the amendment. It's not constructive, and I'll say it's outright politicking. So please support the recommendations of this report. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Blake.
Thank you, convener, and thank you to the officers who worked on this report and to the trade union colleagues who have worked collaboratively with officers. Let's start with the positives. It's really welcome to see the work of the education team and the practitioners have put in, and in particular the amount of and diversity of training offered and completed to support practitioners in the workplace. It's also good to see our progress against the National Behaviour Action Plan. It was interesting to see the comparison of incidents with other local authorities, and I thank officers for bringing this to our attention. There clearly needs to be more consistency of reporting across local authorities, as was just discussed, but was interesting nevertheless. But the reality is that over 400 incidents have been recorded this session, and the vast majority involving pupils with additional support needs. The report leans heavily on per capita comparisons and categorisation techniques that to a certain extent minimises the impact on staff. And then when reading the national guidance released by the Scottish Government on the 17th of June, Schools Fostering a Positive, Inclusive and Safe School Environment, and running through the guidance on consequences, I suspect many people will be pleased to see the recognition of the need for consequences. I was struck, once again, that we cannot improve the situation of violent and disruptive or dysregulated behaviour with policy and guidance alone. These need to be accompanied by additional funding and dedicated investment in education from the Scottish Government. Recently, I was at a meeting in the community where the continued disruptive behaviour in a school was raised. This was not raised by people who were at arm's length from the school, who had heard from something on the grapevine, read it in the P&J or in FUBAR and were commenting about it. These were people who were parents, who were staff, who were youth workers, who had connections. And I asked them what they thought would improve situations in schools, and they said more PSAs would improve the situation. Every class needs a PSA. Now, I'm sure Ms. Shepherd might think to herself, well, I'd love to see that. But it also tied in with a podcast that I was listening to during the week, and the host asked his guests, one a teacher and one a respected journalist who used to be a teacher, how do we improve this situation? And their response was, it won't get better unless we can reduce class sizes, reduce class contact time, and invest in support for additional support needs. Almost 40% of our young people have an additional support need at any one time. In a class of 33 pupils, that's 13 pupils have a variety of needs that need to be recognised and supported by the teacher. This report says that 82% of the incidents in our school involve a pupil with additional support need, and we'll come back to whether the physical environment support is adequate in 10.6. If we look at the Scottish Government guidance, there are numerous suggestions in Appendix 1, illustrative examples of consequences, that take money and access to services which are oversubscribed and tight. These are just some of the ones I picked out. Access to learning support, identify a safe place for the young person if mainstream class becomes too overwhelming, escort to collect and walk child to next class, additional adult support to aid co-regulation, referral to specialist agencies. I think staff will read that and think, wouldn't that be nice if there was more access to this? And I have to say, hats off to the staff in our schools who, when faced with the incident, are responding, running through the reflective questions in Appendix 2. Parents who are fighting to get their child the support they need in our schools will probably be equally cynical as our staff. They will not feel reassured either by the laminated list or by the list of responses that they will feel young people will struggle to get access to. I think that we would all recognise that the guidance is young person centred and promotes early intervention approaches to prevent escalation of behaviour. And the response from Aberdeen's officers reflect this too. And we can see that in the update we have in front of us. But the fact is, our staff and teaching and support staff have been clear that there needs to be additional time, space and resources. The focus on additional training is absolutely welcome, and we look forward to seeing further updates from the education team around this. But the selective use of data does risk obscuring the harm being done, silencing staff experience and undermining confidence. Smaller class sizes, reduced class contact time and investment in ASL is needed to target violent behaviour in our schools. So I come back to my earlier point. We cannot improve the situation of violent and disruptive behaviour with policy and guidance alone. more investment from the Scottish Government will be required to make a difference. And in Aberdeen, a continued urgent focus on this will be required. Please support our amendment.
You, Councillor Grant.
Thank you very much, Convener, and I won't be nearly as eloquent as Councillor Blake was in her contribution. I thought the discussion was very helpful and the questions really helpful as well. I think our external members have asked really excellent questions and raised some issues that I think demands us to look at this particular issue in a different way. I'd also like to thank our education staff for what is clearly an enormous amount of goodwill and good faith that they have shown by engaging in what appears to be, or certainly reads as, significantly additional training, which comes at a cost in terms of time to our staff. And I think that's my concern, is ultimately our staff have a huge burden on them to deliver all of the things that we expect of them, and they have been required to go through those additional things. And that, of course, is welcome. It's not a criticism, but my concern ultimately is that, as has been alluded to, the problem will come down to a lack of resources and additional resources in order to make sure that our staff have the support, the wider support that they require in order to tackle the issue in our classrooms. And I think that if in 6 months' time we get the data back, maybe it will show some progress, but the tone of our amendment speaks to scepticism. And I say that not only as a member of the committee, but as a parent as well. Councillor Blake spoke there about looking at it from a different perspective, from the perspective of a parent who's looking to work in good faith with the system, with the organisation, in some cases to secure diagnosis, which can be painfully, torturously long and unnecessarily delayed. And I think that is an associated challenge that we are still struggling with. I take on board what the Vice Convener says around the various things that the education system, the education service within the council and the work of this committee is doing in a number of respects. There is no doubt that there's a lot of good work being done, but ultimately it will come down to whether or not there is additional resources. So my contribution is that the organisation, the council, in the report that we've had back has done what it can do. That ultimately, I think, is what we are seeing at this point, but that if in 6 months' time we can't see any significant progress made, so what happens next? It comes back to that original point that I'd said, what happens next? And I'm really not clear or sure in any way that we know what happens next. Do we have contingency plans, or is it just more of the same and hoping that all of the indicators that shows rising demand against a backdrop of no additional resources will somehow magically correct itself? I just can't see that happening. And so ultimately, listen, politicians politic. That's what we're here to do. We're members of the committee. So if there is a view, a political view, that an issue isn't being tackled by, in this case in particular, and I've said, I've gave a constructive assessment of the work that the council has done today, the Scottish Government, who has had a record-breaking settlement, is going to ultimately have to consider this through a national lens, and there will ultimately need to be additional resources to tackle the things that they have committed to doing, looking at class sizes, looking at PSAs, looking at additional support for additional support services. That is what we're going to have to look at. And so there is a watching brief here that if the problem doesn't go away, the Scottish Government is going to have to do more than they have done. So that's why I'm absolutely supportive of our somewhat political amendment. We do agree with the course of action that officers have reported, that it goes through the NIF updates, and we'll continue to challenge at future committee cycles, but more will have to be done going forward, and that's why I'm very happy to support Councillor Blake.
Dr. Murray.
Yes, thank you, convener. I agree with a lot of what Kate says about the need for additional PSAs and the need for additional support and the need for additional funding, but it's not in the amendment. And I would love it if it were, and I would agree with her on that, but it's a shame that it's not been put in the amendment.
Yes, thank you. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, convener. I mean, I wasn't planning to speak on the subject today, but I've listened to the debate about what's in this report, and I have to say I'm really impressed by the work that's been done by officers in producing this report and some of the results that they are proposing. And I think I'm quite encouraged that Aberdeen seem to have, are sort of leading the way in some ways in the behaviour management of young people. But I do think that the national action plan from the education minister highlights to me just quite clearly how out of touch this government in Holyrood is to what is happening in our schools. I haven't read the full report from the education convener, but one paragraph of that was highlighted to me, and I want to read it out to you. Support schools to implement a spectrum of relationships and behaviour approaches appropriate to the specific context, taking account of issues such as the public sector, equality, duty, and intersectionality. And I read that and I went, what? This is the sort of waffle that's coming out of Holyrood about what is happening in schools. And my whole view is that instead of a 3-year inaction plan of wafflish, wishful thinking, there needs to be a zero tolerance attitude to violence in schools. And I'm not going to say any more on that subject. Thank you, convener.
Thank you very much. Councillor Allah.
Thank you very much, Governor. And I'm delighted that Councillor MacLeod's not going to say any more. I think that's enough said. The Education Minister is not in the room, so won't be able to respond. But the report in front of us, I think, has generated a lot of questions and a lot of answers. And I think we are in a good place where we are. On the question of what happened next, or more of the same, it can never be more of the same, because it never be more of the same, because our young people, generation after generation, are changing. Our societies is changing. So we have that huge work, and our education department has got, and our teachers have got that huge work of adapting all the time to a new society, and that's very difficult to do. And not only this, but on neurodiversity, we all know that there is a big increase on the evidence and the rise of identification and awareness of neurodivergent conditions among young people is for all to see. So we need to adapt to that as well. So there's a lot of things that we need to adapt to. But I think we don't need to adapt anymore. I'm sure you will find that there were incidents happening a generation ago that we don't need to deal with anymore. But of course, we need to deal with what's in front of us and what's happening in the future. Therefore, yes, it's not going to be more of the same. It's going to be different, and it's going to be addressed. And what I do feel in the room regarding the questioning and the response we got, we got a kind of agreement that the progress is happening. Now it's a slow progress. It's important to identify where we are at. But I think I'm quite. I see that everybody who spoke so far in the debate has recognized that, but the work done has is proven to be the work that should be done. So I'm delighted, convener, to see the progress from of us. And I have no skepticism. I've got a great faith in our education department and our teachers. And I do think that we always have that ability for teachers to adapt to new generation and to new challenges. And we are here to support them. And we are here to call for support for Aberdeen City Council to do this. And we are listening to them, and we'll do as much support as we can. So yes, I'm more than encouraged. I think I'm optimistic or where we're going with this, and I look forward to see what's going to happen next year and the year after. I'll have to add that what I like very much on the data which was shown today on the report is a trend. It's always important to have that trend. Whatever we think that the data is right or wrong, what's important is a trend of this incident, and that informs us a lot on what we can do next. So again, Governor, I like to support the recommendation and making sure that we keep on that right direction to address all our young people needs, and we involve them, as I said in my question, as much as possible in developing our policies. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. Councillor McCrae.
Thank you, convener. Today we're discussing a matter which goes to the heart of how we safeguard our school communities and empower our educators. The progress on the behavioural action plan and the recommendations from the incidents and behaviour report. Let me be clear, and be to no surprise, I'll be supporting the recommendations in the report. They are evidence-informed, grounded in collaboration with school leaders, trade unions and frontline staff, and they build on the real work already underway across Aberdeen. This is not abstract policy. It reflects the complexity of the school environments, the lived experience of staff and pupils, and the practical tools we need to address incidents proportionately and effectively. By contrast, the Labour amendment, while somewhat intentioned, leans too heavily into political point scoring rather than constructive input. Phrases like, if this was best SNP ministers can come up with, are not just unhelpful, they actively distract from the progress we're trying to make within this council. These issues deserve more than slogans and blame. Paragraph 2.3 of the amendment suggests that parents will be sceptical, but where is this evidenced? The report shows that parents are part of the behaviour in schools partnership. Are we to reject collaborative progress just because it doesn't fit into party narrative? And 2.4, implying that a laminated list of bullet points, as all teachers have been given, is a mischaracterisation of what this presents. This report details work in preventative practice, restorative approaches, targeted professional learning, and the use of real-time data through CMIS to better support schools. Let's also consider 2.6 of the amendment, which ironically repeats what the report already commits to, working with trade unions, professional learning, regular updates through the National Improvement Framework. In short, Labour is demanding what has already been done and being implemented through our work that officers are doing, while simultaneously dismissing the work that has been led by the professionals they claim to support. We owe our teachers and pupils more than performative amendments. We owe them commitment, clarity and continuity of support. We urge members to back the report's recommendations. And I'd be very interested if Councillor Blake could sum up what Dr Murray has raised here, what the speech has come in to represent with the PSA support isn't referenced in the amendment here. If we're looking to put that, you really need to have that in your amendment that I put forward to this committee, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Malik.
Thank you very much, Convener. Can I thank the officer for the report? But I must say from the outset, I'm unsure for her recommendations and how she intends to report progress against local behavior plan through regular national improvement framework update. However, we have included the recommendation within our amendment as we reflect upon the guidance issued by the Scottish Government on the 17th of June, entitled Fostering a Positive, Inclusive and a Safe School Environment. I'm disappointed that the SNP administration have not moved anything other than, cannot shake head, listen to me, other than officer recommendation, perhaps like us, they recognize that the Scottish government guidance is a weak, to say the least. Convener, let me be clear. Any measures that can effectively tackle disruption in classroom is welcome, but perhaps will be spectacle of the approach being taken if this is the best that the SNP minister can come up with. This clearly ties into this report giving the administration want to progress local behavior through regular national frameworks. The truth, convener, is that the teachers and the staff in school will not feel reassured by a laminated list of bullet points within the guidance when they are having to deal with violent incidents involving pupils. Convener, this SNP administration cannot shy away from the violence in our school. They cannot continue to bury their heads in the sand and the hope it goes away, because it won't. What this council requires is strong leadership. A strong leadership can deal with these complex issues. As Councillor Many said, that it is a complex issue. Of course it is, but leadership can tackle these complex issues, and you can measure the magnitude of this complexity, but you have lack of leadership. And this is the reason that we moved to our amendment, and this is this blame game as a trademark of SNP, as Councillor McRae said, that it is just a political point scoring. No, do not blame others. Take some responsibility. Take blame on yourself, because due to the lack of leadership, we are having these issues. And however, Convener, Aberdeen Labour remains serious about supporting teachers and staff and pupils in school by tackling violence in our school, and to repair the damage done by the SNP during their 18 years in power nationally and 3 years in power locally. This report and these recommendations are, in my opinion, simply pushing the matters to a side rather than dealing with the important aspect, which is violence in our schools. So please support Councillor Blake amendment. You already agreed with our previous 2 amendments. Thank you.
Back to Councillor Blake to sum up.
Thank you, Convener. At the beginning, Councillor Grant mentioned so what. There's a lot of information here about the training and the other measures that have been put in place, and this is welcome, and I think that's been welcomed across the board. We look forward to see the tracking of the impact of this in 6 months' time, which was raised by Ms Monroe with regard to staff and with regard to young people as raised by Dr Murray. And depending on the answer to that, we will be able to answer Councillor Grant's so what. What we have heard in questioning also is there's no definition of the violent behaviour nationally, and local authorities may be collating this differently and interpreting this differently. And I would hope that's something that could be addressed by the Scottish Government, and it strikes me something that we could make some moves to address locally as well. I do agree fully with Convener that schools should be a respectful, caring environment, and there's a lot of work here that is demonstrating progress towards that. There are obviously over 400 incidents which were recorded this session. and the vast majority involve pupils with additional support needs. As Dr. Murray said, this is a failure of the support system, not the young person. So it comes back to resource, and that's not within the gift of Ms. Shepherd or Ms. Milne, or for this, or even this committee. That's for the Scottish Government, who needs to provide the additional investment to ensure we are getting it right for every child. More will have to be done. And so we will revisit this in 6 months and see what the tracking data tells us. And I do invite the external members and the convener, vice convener, to engage us on what we could do as a combined approach to how we pursue those additional resources once we've seen how things are performing. Please support our amendment.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Blake. I will be continuing to urge the committee to support the recommendations. The committee has shown considerable leadership on this issue of behaviour. The EIS has carried out national surveys of its members, 2019, 2021, 2023, and I believe we are the only or one of the very few local authorities which actually took those survey findings seriously, and we responded. Significant engagement locally with the EIS and the unions, and we devised our local behaviour action plan, and that's been created in a very collaborative spirit with everyone in this committee and with teachers and staff, trying to make sure that we create the safest possible learning environments in every school setting. So we have shown leadership locally, and I have to admit, Labour have been part of that. So we've all worked together very well, I think, and we can read through the report of the very considerable amount of initiatives, training and so forth, which have been provided to make sure that we are as accurate and as robust as possible in reporting incidents and encouraging staff and teachers to take part in that process, so that we've got an accurate understanding of what is happening in schools with dysregulated behaviour. And also, as part of that, we have invested very considerably, particularly in ASN. We're creating a new ASN facility at the new Riverbank School. We are investing locally. We have protected teacher numbers. We are dedicated to invest in the professional support and skills, which can then be offered to teachers and staff as part of their training facilities. So yeah, we are investing locally. I thought that I had a very strong sense of disparity, because Councillor Blake and Councillor Grant did not really explain the reasons for their amendment. The amendment is basically a non-specific, rather intemperate anti-SNP government tirade, and that the comments about resources, yeah, that is important for us to talk about resources. And as I just mentioned, we have locally, through the Behaviour Action Plan, through actually working together collaboratively as a committee, we've supported the case for further investment, such as the ASN wing at Riverbank. So, you know, we do have a strong, creative and caring spirit that's in play, and that's why the amendment is just so at odds with everything that we've been trying to do as a committee. Surprising and rather puzzling. And just to mention that I am a Liberal Democrat, and we have a Liberal Democrat SNP partnership in the council. So just for clarity there, stating the obvious, and we're here as a partnership to provide that collaborative empowerment, which I think has helped us to tackle so many of these behaviour problems. But we've got a long way to go. We're not complacent. We can never really have enough resource to tackle the issues that are coming forward with various causes for dysregulated behaviour. So yeah, we cannot be complacent, so we have to work together, and you know, we cannot rely on a parent-child relationship with the Scottish Government. We have to take that responsibility for ourselves, not to be constantly relying on them to show us the way when we've been able to achieve so much locally. We've taken the initiative, we've been creative, we've listened very, very carefully to staff and teachers in schools, parents, families, and so forth. I think that the point about listening to young people, that's an area that we need to do more. We need to do more, and that will help us to continue to develop and improve the behaviour action plan. So I urge the committee to support the recommendations. Thank you. Let's go to the vote.
The convener, the committee has before it a motion in the name of the convener and an amendment in the name of Councillor Blake. Would members please vote motion, amendment, or no vote? Convener?
Motion.
Vice convener?
Motion.
Councillor Allard?
Motion.
Councillor Blake?
Amendment.
Councillor Cameron?
Motion.
Councillor Fairful?
Motion.
Councillor Farker?
Amendment.
Councillor Grant?
Amendment.
Councillor McGregor?
Motion.
Councillor Malik?
Amendment.
Councillor MacLeod?
Amendment.
Councillor McCrae?
Motion.
Councillor Radley?
Motion.
Ms Barclay?
Motion.
Mr Haywood?
No vote.
Ms Monroe?
No vote.
Dr Murray?
Motion.
Mr Murray?
No vote.
Mr Regmi?
No vote.
And Mrs Smith?
Motion.
Thank you. Convener, that's 11 votes for the motion, 5 for the amendment with 4 abstentions. The motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That takes us very neatly on to 1 o'clock, when I believe there is an event for the Mela. Councillor Blake, can you guide us on this? What's happening?
Apparently there's a photo being taken for the launch of the Mela at 1 o'clock, and we were requested if we have time, could we pop along so to fill the photo.
Okay, let's break for half an hour. Is that too short? Back at 1:30? Is that okay? Back at 1:30. Thank you.